Warning, the new weapons might actually be illegal. Chain lightning is bouncing all over the place and the Asgardian Lute is basically a disco of death, and yeah, I'll probably have to nerf them later. Welcome to Midgard Survivors Devlog 19. One of the first things I tackled was healing in the game. Until now, if you lost health, you just stayed low until you died. That made the game very punishing, especially for melee builds that have to dive into swarms. So now, enemies can drop food items. The cool part is that the food isn't just a flat number. It actually scales with the max health of the enemy that dropped it. This means food stays relevant even when you're in later waves fighting tougher mobs. I also added a bit of flavor here, the Sea Ogre. It has a higher chance of dropping food, so now he's not just a chunky mob, he's kinda like your walking grocery store when you're desperate mid-fight. I've also been expanding the enemy roster to keep things interesting. The Raven is a charger-type enemy. It's all about fast surprise attacks and forcing you to react quickly instead of kiting everything in circles. The Ironwood Bear is more of a classic heavy mob. He's kinda slow, but he soaks up hits and adds weight to the waves. And then we have the Myrlings. These guys are creepy little zombie babies inspired by Scandinavian folklore. They show up right from the start in Wave 1, giving the game a more unsettling vibe early on. And to really drive the point home, at around Wave 10 you'll face the Boss Myrling. This giant version has over 500 health and drops a big pile of XP. In terms of mechanics, it's a preview of the fire giant boss that comes later in the run, but it gives you that first big oh crap moment much earlier. I've been watching how the game feels when leveling, and it was honestly too fast. You ding level after level, and it just spams upgrades without really thinking. So I increased the experience required per level by about 20%, and it slows progression down just enough that you actually feel the curve. Movement also needed work. Previously, you could run through mobs like they weren't there, and it completely removed tension. So now collisions matter. You actually have to maneuver around enemies and terrain instead of ignoring them. And to make that fair, I doubled player health, since you inevitably get hit more when you're surrounded. Defense got a total rework too. The old system was flat reduction, which meant that if you had enough defense, you basically just take 0 damage. And that was actually kind of boring. Like, I watched people play and they were just ignoring stuff. Now it's percentage-based mitigation, and that scales up to 95%. So this way defense always feels useful, but it never completely breaks the game. And because melee players in particular were getting shredded, I added health regen. So you heal 1% of your max HP every 3 seconds. It's small enough to not make you immortal, but over time it makes high health builds and health upgrades much more valuable. Speaking of which, the health upgrade now gives 50 HP instead of 25, so tank builds actually feel like tanks. For the weapons, this is probably the most fun part of the update. I added Fan of Knives, which is a piercing cone attack for rogues. It makes the rogue feel more agile and bursty and able to clear swarms in front of them. And then there's Chain Lightning, which is now the Völva's starting weapon. It automatically bounces between enemies. Each hit becomes a little weaker than the last. It feels awesome in practice because it scales naturally with bigger crowds. I also updated zone weapons like the Bright Zone and the Asgardian Lute. Yeah. I renamed it from Plinky Plunky, so rest in peace, Plinky Plunky. You were a dear instrument friend. These are now permanent effects around the player, and they're currently overtuned to the point of comedy. Like right now, they absolutely shred enemies, and honestly, I kind of love how chaotic it feels, but eventually we're going to need to tone them down and put them in place with the rest of the weapons. Melee weapons in general weren't keeping up, so I gave a major buff to Giant Sword, Jotun Spear, and Wildling Claws, and also the Ice Shard spell. So now they actually feel competitive compared to ranged spam. Next patch, I'll be bringing down Orbiting Fireball and Chained Blade. They're still way too overpowered compared to everything else. The world itself needed some tidying up, so I put a boulder barrier around the map. Before you could just kite infinitely into the wide open space, which kind of killed the pacing. Now you are locked into a smaller arena, which forces more intense encounters. Enemies overall got a move speed buff. Some mobs were so slow that they never really reached you, which is not great for this kind of game. Now they actually pose a threat. I also added hit feedback, so both enemies and players now flash when they are damaged. It's a small thing, but it really makes the combat feel more snappy. Like it just feels good, like watching blinky all over the map. And then I experimented with particle effects. So right now, the most noticeable one is the Asgardian Lute because it spawns a little floating music note when it deals damage. And the cool thing is that the system works across all weapons, so I can add more fun effects down the line. The spike trap also got improvements. It's bigger. Finally, I added an audio manager to handle music and sounds, and it covers level up pings and placeholder background music at the moment. Nothing's final yet, but the system is there, so I can expand on it later. And I also fixed a bug with the health bar. Sometimes you'd start a run at half HP, which was kind of unfair and also really confusing, so that's been fixed now. The big news is that the game is actually playable right now in alpha state on the Unity Play website. So you can try it right now in your browser, and I would love to hear what you think, whether it's feedback, critique, or just your general impressions. The link is in the description. And that's everything for Devlog 19. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe if you want to see what's next in Midgard Survivors. Tastygraph out. Bye.